Hi, I'm Emily and welcome to the Pepper Knits Knitting Podcast. I am a knitter based in Perth in Western Australia and thank you for joining me for another episode. I have some exciting whip updates that I want to share with you this morning. I have two main whips that I'm having so much fun working on both of these. So the first project is the Northland sweater, which is designed by Petite Knit, and I am knitting this for my boyfriend in the Bendigo Woollen Mills Classic 12 ply in this really nice green colour. I have spoken about this in my last couple of episodes. I think I had frogged this yarn from a zipper sweater that I had knit for him previously that just didn't really work out. It was at too tight of a gauge and he didn't really get that much wear out of it, and I think he felt a bit guilty that the yarn was sitting in a sweater that he just never really reached for. So I offered to frog that one and reknit it into something that he would actually wear. I cast this on just after I wrapped up the last episode, and I have made so much progress on this. I don't even know how it's happened. It just seems to have gone by really quickly, and I feel like after only a couple of days of working on it, somehow I have a whole yoke. So here is what I have so far. I have just split for sleeves and started working on the body. It is a saddle shoulder construction, which I always find really fun to work up. So I am knitting this pattern off gauge just because the yarn that I wanted to use was a little bit thicker than what's recommended in the pattern. I wanted to be mindful of making sure the fabric in this sweater was at a nicer gauge and would be a little bit nicer to wear and also much easier for me to actually knit. So after a few swatches, I settled on going up to a 5.5mm needle to work up this sweater, but it does mean that my gauge was quite a few stitches off from the pattern. I did the calculations of just my stitch gauge and worked out if I knit the instructions for the size small, I should fall somewhere in between where my boyfriend wanted this sweater to fit. I didn't actually do any calculations for the row gauge in the pattern, so I was a little bit worried that the yoke depth would be way too long or way too short. I just thought that I would knit the whole yoke and just try it on him as I went, just to see how it was going. I think I tried it on when I was about halfway through the shaping for the yoke, and I was actually surprised at how well it was fitting. I did another try on straight after I had split the sleeves, and I think I knit only one round in the body just to try and get a bit of a rough idea on how the yoke depth was fitting, and again it seemed like it was fitting okay and he felt pretty comfortable in it. I do have to say I felt like the rounds were getting really long towards the end of the yoke, but I am really glad I'm knitting this at quite a chunky gauge compared to what I usually knit for myself, so I think that's partly why it's felt like it's gone by really quickly. In terms of my next steps for this project, I do want to triple check that the fit of this is going to be okay before I spend hours and hours working on the body and the sleeves. So I'm probably going to add the collar on fairly soon just to make sure that the neckline is going to fit okay, and I think that might cinch in a little bit and maybe affect the fit as well. So I'll probably add the collar on. It has a very short amount of ribbing on there, which is good because he doesn't really want this to be too high of a neck and quite likes the shape of it at the moment. So I'll probably stick to the pattern and do a fairly short ribbed collar on this. And then I think I will probably add a little bit of extra length onto the body. I do have a few centimeters of the body done already, but I think I might add a few more just to be able to gauge the fit a little bit better and make sure that it's going to have a good amount of ease for him. And then once that's done, I will probably give the whole thing a proper wet block. And once that's dry, have him try it on and just be 100% confident that he likes how it's fitting. I do find that this yarn has a tendency to grow a little bit when it is blocked, but because this has been all blocked and washed a few times before, I'm not sure how that will affect the yarn and the fabric. I think it will be sensible to do a mid-project block where it's not at a point where it will be super painful to have to rip everything back and make any adjustments. For the actual pattern, I am finding it very easy to follow. It is typical petite knit, very well written and structured and easy to follow. I made one very small modification. I wouldn't even call it a modification, but basically for the saddle shoulder, because you are working the first bit of this flat to shape the back neckline, the pattern just instructs you to make one lefts and rights on the right and the wrong side of the fabric when you're working it flat. I just swapped out the wrong side increases to make one left and right purls, just so I could keep it a little bit more consistent across the whole shaping of the saddle shoulder. I honestly don't think it would have made much difference, but it just felt more intuitive for me to be doing the purl increases on the wrong side. But apart from that, I have followed everything else to the pattern. Of course, apart from my gauge being completely off and using a larger needle size. So my next project is going by so quickly as well, and I'm having so much fun working on this. It is the beginnings of my sweet shop blanket. This is looking so good, and I'm just having so much fun working on this. If you somehow haven't heard of the sweet shop blanket, it is a super popular pattern that was released by Penrose earlier this year, I want to say, and so many people have been knitting it. And since it was even released, or since she was originally working on the sample, I knew that I would one day eventually get around to making my own. This is the first time I have knit one of Laura's patterns, and I don't know why it's taken me so long to get around to it. I think all of her garment designs I could see myself making and wearing, but just they've never made it high enough onto my priority list. So far, I'm really enjoying reading her pattern writing style. There are sections of more conversational writing, which is really nice to read, especially when it's someone who you watch a lot of video content from. You can really understand how they're speaking and almost imagine them saying it in their voice. I'm not sure if that goes for all of her garment patterns as well. I think this is a bit more of a unique piece just because there are sections where it makes sense to have a bit more of an explanation rather than an instruction. For example, there are parts where it talks about how you can maximize your yarn usage or how it might work for advent calendars and things. So yeah, it has been super enjoyable to knit something from a new to me designer. So as I mentioned, this is a perfect scrappy project and I'm having so much fun picking out all of the colors. So everything in this blanket, apart from the white main color, are just things that have been sitting in my scrap piles for some of them years at this point, and it's really nice to be thinking about each project as I'm working each color. Some of these have been gift knits, some of them were from projects that I made for myself. The brown one is from my Arrow sweater, this is from my mini mock neck tank. Some of them also are from socks, and I think this one I made my boyfriend a hat from a couple of years ago. So yeah, it's been really nice to have a bit of a trip down memory lane thinking about all of the projects that I have been using these yarns for. As you can see, I've also been very disciplined in weaving in my ends, apart from this last one that I have literally just finished. I don't let myself start a new square until I have woven in the ends from the last one. Doing one square worth of ends doesn't take very long. It's like a 5-minute job, whereas I can imagine after a whole blanket, that would probably be hours of weaving in ends all in one go. And I also think it just makes the blanket look a little bit neater and tidier, especially on the wrong side where you don't have heaps of ends flying around. I think it just makes it look a little bit nicer and a bit more motivating to work on it as well. I started doing this in the last episode. I think I had started picking out scraps to put into this blanket, and since then I have filled up this entire bag full of lots of different scraps in my stash. I have 3 of the main color, which is Bendigo Woollen Mills Luxury 8-ply, and I'm really enjoying working with this one. I have to say, I think I prefer working the luxury yarn than the classic Bendigo Woollen Mills that I'm using for the Northland sweater. Oh, the other thing I did want to mention was a quick comparison of these yarns. I was watching one of Smash Knit's podcasts and she was talking about the classic Bendigo Woollen Mills yarn and mentioned about how it is twisted the opposite way than the luxury yarn, and that meant that it is a little bit more difficult to work with. I have to say I never thought about that or really noticed it up until she mentioned it, and she is totally right. When I actually look at the yarn on my needles, you can see that it has come completely unplied. Like each stitch, you can see each strand of the plies in the yarn. So as I have been knitting on the Northland sweater with the classic yarn, I have noticed that the yarn has been untwisting itself. I haven't noticed it's been an issue for me, to be honest. I think it might be a combination of the needles I'm using, my knitting style, the gauge that I'm knitting it at maybe, but I can see for some people it would probably be very annoying. So that is something interesting that I wanted to note. So back to my sweet shop blanket, I am definitely much preferring working with the luxury yarn. I don't think it is that much more expensive than the classic, and I think it is much softer and nicer to work with, especially in such a nice squishy garter stitch blanket like this. From experience, I think it pills a little bit more than the other base that they do, but if you don't mind the pilling, I think it is worth the few extra dollars. So when I started this, I had a very brief moment of doubt about choosing this bright white color, and I was thinking that it was not really going to go with all the colors of the scraps that I was working with, but that has very quickly been resolved. I think it looks really good having all of these colors with a bright white. I think it goes really well with the warmer tones like the brown and also the cooler tone scraps that I have, like these two on the end. So in all of my scraps in this bag, I do have another bag with even smaller scraps in there that just wouldn't be enough to use by themselves. So some of these squares I knit with fingering weight held double, and some of them I knit with a DK. So for example, this one is held double, whereas this is just a DK weight by itself. So it makes it a very versatile pattern to be able to use up all of the scraps. You can also see that this one is knit with two different coloured fingering weight yarns held together to create a marl, and this is probably one of my favourite squares. I really like how the marl has turned out. So like I was saying, I have another bag here with some smaller scraps that I just wouldn't have had enough of by themselves. I also have some scraps that are like a white or an off-white cream colour. I have quite a few of these types of scraps. And originally I wasn't going to include them in here because I didn't think there would be a good contrast between this one and the main colour. But I'm thinking I might be able to hold some of these with some of my other smaller scraps and create a marl like that and still be able to use them in the blanket. I'm looking forward to being able to add this one in as well, this mint colour and the light blue. I think these two will look really good together. So it's just really fun to be able to get to the next square and pick out and plan my colour choices. I am trying not to overthink the colour choices too much and just pick a colour out, and if I think it's going to look good in the placement, I'll add it in, and if not, I would just go and find a different colour instead. Saying that, I did start this square last night, and I think I originally put a turquoise colour in that was kind of similar to this blue, and then when I put it in and started it, I overall looked at the blanket and didn't like it, so I did rip that one out. And then I added in some grey that I liked the colour, but it ended up being a little bit too thick because it was kind of like a sport weight yarn that I was holding double, and I just didn't like how the gauge looked compared to the other ones around it. So if I add something in and I decide I don't like it, I am just ripping it back and trying a different colour. That's kind of part of the fun for me though. I don't really mind ripping it out because each square doesn't take that long. I actually thought it would take a lot longer to get to this point, but it has been very easy to pick up the construction for the squares, and yeah, it doesn't take me a huge amount of time. I think one of the best features about this pattern is that you build in the slip stitch edging on each square. So technically you can finish this blanket whenever you want, whenever you run out of scraps or you get to a size that you like. There is also an option to add an I-cord border, so I haven't really decided what I am going to do yet. I'm just going to see how big I can get this. I think I'm going to try and aim for a decent sized rectangular blanket, but I'll just see how I go and where I get up to with using all of my scraps. So there is an update on my projects. I have had a really good week actually. I have a friend who I have known since primary school come over from England to visit for a little while. She's here for a few weeks, so it's been really nice to spend some time with her. I think we're going to take my nephews to the aquarium today, which I'm so excited for. I think the adults are probably more excited than the boys are to go to the aquarium. So I'm looking forward to spending some more time together and yeah, just enjoy being out and about. It is Tuesday morning. I have had the best weekend. It has been so nice to spend lots of time with my friend. We went for a really lovely walk on Sunday. It was a little bit warm, but it was so nice to be out in the sun. I haven't had a huge amount of knitting time, but it's been totally worth it to spend lots of time together. I usually get a lot of knitting done in the evenings, but we've also been spontaneously doing things in the evenings for dinner, which has been lovely. We went to the beach last night to watch the sunset, and then they came back here for dinner, and it's just so nice to just sit and chat about anything and everything. But I have had a little bit of progress on the Northland sweater. I've actually been mainly working on my sweet shop blanket. I just can't seem to put it down. But I do want to share where I'm up to with the Northland sweater. So you can see it's not currently attached to any yarn, and it's not even on the needles at the moment. I just put it on these try-on tubes. So I've worked a little bit more on the body, and I think it's at a good length now where it'll probably be okay to try it on. I'm going to sit down now and add in the colour. I'm not sure if I want to go down as many needle sizes as the pattern suggests for the collar. I think you go down 2 needle sizes for the ribbing on the collar, and then 1 needle size smaller for the cuffs and the hem. I think I might do everything on 1 needle size smaller, just so the collar doesn't cinch in too much and stays quite open like it is now. The collar is not a huge amount of knitting, so if I end up doing it on 1 needle size smaller and wish I'd gone down more, I don't mind ripping that much out. But I think 1 needle size smaller should be okay. I have held this Northland sweater up to the sweater that I'm trying to match the size of, and it looks like the body is pretty much exactly the same width at the moment. So hopefully it doesn't grow too much with blocking and become way too oversized. But honestly, if it does, that's kind of why I'm doing this block at this point, so that I'm not committed to that length and won't want to rip anything out. So we'll just have to see how we go. But yes, for now I'm going to go ahead and add in the collar. I may as well share an update on my sweet shop blanket as well. Last time I showed I had 6 squares, and I'm currently working on the 10th square. So here is what I have so far. I really love how this is looking. I love how bright and colourful it is, but it's not too overwhelming to look at because it has the white main colour with each square, and I can't wait to keep working on this. I'm about halfway through adding on the 10th square now, and it's just been really fun to pick out the next colour. Like I said, I'm trying not to overthink all of the colour placements, but I am trying to be careful about where I place lighter and darker colours as well, but I think it's looking pretty good so far. I have a feeling I'm going to get to the point where I might need to start repeating some colours soon, but that's okay. I think I'll have plenty of scraps to get a decent sized blanket out of this. As much fun as it is to be knitting on this, I think I am going to pick up the Northland sweater again and try and do a little bit more work on it. I just sat down to add the collar, and the pattern recommends going down like 3 needle sizes. So it knits the body on a 5mm and then suggests doing the collar on a 3.5, but I don't think even a 4mm will be too comfortable to be knitting ribbing with this yarn. I decided I'm going to try and do it on a 4.5mm needle and just see how it feels and how it looks. I am just worried if I don't go down small enough, maybe it will have a weird shape. I definitely trust Petite knit, and I don't want to go against her word too much and regret it. So I'll just try it on this and see how it's looking. a few days since I have shared any knitting updates. I have been spending so much time with my friend and I've had such a good time with her. We have been doing quite a few touristy activities, but it's actually really fun to be a tourist in your own city and get to do the things that you would never normally do. We have been to Caversham Wildlife Park. We had a day out in Fremantle and we did a tour of the prison, and that was actually so good. I can't believe I've never done one before, but I would definitely go back and do a different one because there was so much that we didn't get to see. We have just been spending lots of time together and relaxing, having some good food. I have been getting a little bit of knitting done in between. I've been working on the gift knit pair of socks, and that's actually been pretty good knitting to have whilst I'm just sitting around a table talking with people, and I've managed to finish both socks. They have gone by very quickly considering I haven't really thought about working on them too much. I've just been taking them along with me in the car, or whilst we're just sitting around chatting, I've been working on them. So that's kind of nice that I've had a project to have on the needles that is a bit more mindless, and another gift knit that has been ticked off the list. So I won't share those on this episode until they have been gifted to that person, but I'm quite happy with how they turned out. The striping pattern didn't look exactly how I thought it was going to be. It is a lot more random than I thought, but I think they still look really good. I did end up knitting a broken rib pair of socks just because I find that they're a lot more flexible in the sizing than a plain vanilla stockinette sock. I do like how the yarn looks a little bit better in the stockinette, so if I was to use that yarn again, I would probably knit vanilla socks with them, but I really hope that the recipient likes them as much as I do because I think they do still look really beautiful. I haven't touched my Sweet Shop blanket since the last time I shared it, although I probably finished that one square that I was working on. I think I was halfway through adding in one square and I'm pretty sure I would have finished that one. But I did end up going back to the Northland sweater last night, and I have some small updates to share on this one. So the last time you saw this, I had just added the collar on, and I ended up doing that on 4.5mm needles, I think. Since then, I have blocked everything and had my boyfriend try it on and give me some feedback on how it was fitting and if he was happy with everything. So here is the blocked sweater, and as you can see, I have started one of the sleeves. The fabric didn't actually change too much after it was blocked. I probably could have stretched it a little bit more lengthwise or widthwise if I'd needed to, but I really just tried to lay it flat as it was and not make any changes. The actual width of the body and across the shoulders and everything fits him perfectly, and I'm so impressed that I did that gauge math correctly. And I think it was also just a little bit of luck with my row gauge to make sure that the length of everything was going to be okay. He really likes the depth of the collar and that it's not too tight. The only concern he had was at the underarm here. He just felt like it was a little bit too open, and I wasn't sure if that was just because of these cast on stitches and he couldn't really imagine how it would look with an actual sleeve on there, or if the yoke depth was too long. So I had a little bit of a panic moment there, but I just thought that I would pick up a sleeve and start knitting a little bit just to give a better idea of how it would actually fit with the sleeve on it before I go back and rip some of the yoke out. Of course, if I'd needed to do that, I probably would have reluctantly done it, but my main concern about that was then that I'm taking out some of the stitches in the sleeve or the body or both, and that would have an effect on the actual fit of the garment in terms of the width. So I was a little bit hesitant to do that before I'd actually added a sleeve on, because just visually it looked like it was fitting okay, and I didn't really want to take out too much of the yoke depth and affect the underarm and where it was sitting. So yeah, last night I picked up the sleeve and started knitting a little bit on it and had him try it on again, and he was fine with it. He didn't even notice. So now that I have a sleeve on the needle, I will probably just keep going on this sleeve and probably pick up and knit the other sleeve before finishing off on the body. It's actually probably a good thing that I've ended up doing this, just because working a small circumference on a sleeve going round and round can be a little bit easier, I find, without having a huge mass of body attached to it as well. I don't know if it will make a huge difference, but I feel like it's a little bit easier to maneuver the whole thing without having mounds of stockinette of body hanging off it as well. I am following the decrease rate and the length of the sleeves as written in the pattern for the size small, as I've knit for everything else. The only thing I did have to change was the number of rows I did between each decrease. If you have ever knit a petite knit pattern, you're probably familiar with how she writes her sleeve instructions, but basically she'll say to knit a sleeve to a certain length at the same time, doing decreases every 9th row or however many row you need for your size. So my row gauge for this I measured this morning, and I'm getting about 22.5 rows per 10 centimeters, whereas the pattern calls for 25 rows per 10 centimeters. So I knew that I would have to adjust the number of rows in between each decrease that I was working. So to do that, I just calculated the number of centimeters between each decrease that were intended to be in the pattern. And say, for example, it was every 5 centimeters I needed to decrease. I just used that number and plugged that into my gauge and worked out how many rows that would be. In the end, it was only, I think, 1 row different. So if your row gauge is only a tiny bit off, say like half a stitch or 1 stitch, it probably wouldn't make too much of a difference. Because I was a few extra rows off, I think it was worth just doing that calculation to check. But because petite knit does give you that overall length of the sleeve that you're aiming for, I think it is helpful to be able to keep a track of that when you're getting towards the end of the sleeve. And of course, everybody has different length sleeves and preferences, so it is a good idea to be trying on as you go regardless of that. So this is going by really well. I think it's going by much quicker than I thought it would be. Definitely compared to when I was knitting the zipper sweater, because this gauge is so much nicer to work up. I find that I can work on it for longer periods of time without my hands getting too tired. And yeah, it is quite a loose gauge, so I feel like even a little bit of knitting feels like quite a bit of progress. Oh, one more thing that I have also managed to squeeze in of my knitting time is another little ornament, and I made this tiny little sweater, and I think it is the cutest ornament I have made yet. To be fair, I've only made the stars and this one, but I love it so much. I followed one of the free patterns that I found on Ravelry to knit this, and I think it's an acrylic yarn that I had in stash. It does call for a fingering weight yarn, and most of my fingering weight scraps are put towards my sweet shop blanket at the moment, so I don't have a huge amount to work with apart from these lighter colors like all of the whites and the creams that I didn't want to use. But I think the white does look really festive, and I think it will look really cute on my tree when I eventually get that up. It is just so cute. I'm not sure if I'll make more of these. It was a little bit more fiddly than doing the crochet stars, so I might maybe make 1 or 2 more, but I don't think this is something that I will keep going back to just because I felt like it took a little while, and yeah, it was a little bit fiddly, especially for the sleeves, but it was worth it to get at least one of these off the needles. It's definitely something that you could sit down and do easily in an afternoon if you had a few hours to spare, but I ended up dragging that out for quite a few days, and in the end the only thing that motivated me to finish this was the fact that I needed the 2.25mm needles that I was using for this for the socks that I was knitting. So that is a little bit of an update on my knitting and what I've been up to for the past few days. It is the next day now, it's Wednesday, and last night I did manage to finish one of the sleeves on the Northland sweater, and then I had my boyfriend try it on, and it was so long. I distinctly remember yesterday saying, oh, I'm so proud of myself, I've done all the gauge math, everything fits great in the yoke and the body, and oh, the sleeves you just try it on as you go anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I did not try this on as it went. I think because it's inconveniencing somebody else to try it on constantly, I just kept knitting and assumed because the body and the yoke was fine that would translate into the sleeves. But yes, I even did all of the ribbing of the bottom, and this is how much too long they are, so I need to rip back this much. Saying that, he did also think that they were a little bit too wide, which I can kind of see. Even just without them on, they are pretty wide, and I should have really known that because I was able to knit basically the whole sleeve on a 60cm cable and only swapped magic loop just for the very last bit in the ribbing. So that should have probably been a bit of a red flag that they might be a little bit too big and I should try it on. But to be honest, this only took me like 2 or 3 days to knit, so it's not like a huge amount of time invested into this. So I do need to take back this much and probably rework the maths a little bit on how I want to taper the sleeves. I think maybe where I went wrong is that I followed the instructions and the decrease increments for the size small, whereas technically when I think about the actual proportions of the sweater, I'm aiming for something between the large and the extra large. So maybe I need to look at the difference between those sizes, and perhaps there are more rapid decreases in the larger sizes. So I'm gonna have to take another look at the pattern, and I also figured out roughly the ideal sleeve taper that he would like in the length, so at least I have those numbers and I can kind of figure it out. I have a few other non-knitting related things on my to-do list today. I have a plant that desperately needs to be repotted, so I went and bought this yesterday. It's just a really inexpensive one from Kmart. I think it was only $12, but it should be plenty big enough to rehome that plant. And I do actually have some work that I need to sit down and get done as well. I am a little bit conscious about timings for knitting the Cara wrap cardigan that I want to knit for my wedding. I haven't even cast it on yet, haven't swatched or anything. I have the yarn and I have the pattern, but I am a little bit cautious about making sure that I'm not stress knitting any point for that project. I'm not getting married until March, so I have plenty of time, but ideally I kind of wanted to have everything finished by Christmas, like all of the major things that I could get done by Christmas. I wanted to have it all done. And I also haven't even started like making my final dress yet. I know this isn't really knitting related, so you can skip ahead if you're not really interested, but I am making my own wedding dress, which is something I have always known that I would want to do, and I've been really enjoying the process. I did consider using a ready-to-go pattern, but I just couldn't really find anything that met the vision that I had in mind. I haven't tried on any ready-to-wear wedding dresses, which probably would have been a good idea, but here we are. It's too late now, and I've already committed to the style that I want. And it's taken a lot of refining and changes and Pinterest searching and trying on lots of different styles of mock-ups that I've made for myself to settle on a design. The skirt was quite easy. I kind of knew the silhouette of the skirt that I would want. It just was a bit more of a technical challenge to get to that point. The bodice is where I've had a bit more of a challenge in terms of the style that I wanted and also making sure that it fits me really well. I have changed the neckline and the shape of the back so many times, but I think I'm almost at the point now where I am ready to finalize the pattern and actually cut into my fabric. So the dress and the wrap cardigan are two things that I really want to get a move on fairly soon. If I have enough yarn and time, I would also really love to make a winter clutch or one of Petite Knit's clutch patterns as a bag in the matching yarn if I have that left over from the cardigan, which I should do. And again, I would also love to knit myself a pair of like DK weight fluffy socks in the same yarn if I have enough left over. That one might be a little bit of a stretch considering I've changed patterns, but I think the Cara wrap cardigan has slightly less meterage requirements than what the late summer wrap cardigan had, which is what I had intended to knit. I was considering maybe starting one of the accessories, but I really want to make sure I have enough yarn to knit the cardigan first, and then whatever I have left over I can allocate towards the accessories. So that is what's been going on in my brain at the moment. I feel like that's probably pretty normal when you have a wedding that is coming around very quickly, especially after Christmas and New Year's, and then my birthday comes around, and that time of year is just very busy. I have a lot of friend and family birthdays at the start of the year, so I am conscious that now is probably the calm before the storm, and I just want to feel like I'm preparing as best as I can. I'm just procrastinating repotting this plant, so I think I'm going to go and do that now, and then it will be done. So last night I sat down and frogged the whole sleeve of the Northland sweater, which was a little bit painful, but I did manage to re-knit basically all of it last night as well. I've been rewatching Grey's Anatomy and I've been getting so into it, so sitting down and watching a few episodes feels like a sleeve can go by very quickly. And then I managed to finish off all of the decreases this morning whilst I've been eating breakfast. And I think I'm at the point now where I can go back and add in the ribbing. There's only a small amount of ribbing on the cuff as well. This design does have very short ribbing. I have added a few extra rounds just to make it look a little bit more in proportion with the chunkiness of the stitches of my version. So I think I ended up adding about 1 more centimeter onto the cuff when I did it previously. So for the sleeve, I only added 1 more decrease, but I did have to shorten the sleeve quite a bit. So I ended up adding the decreases a lot more frequently than they were in before. And I did a quick trial last night when I was about halfway through and it was fitting perfectly and it wasn't too tight, but didn't have a lot of extra fabric in the underarm or at the bottom of the sleeve either. So I have good hopes that this will fit a lot better. I can't try it on right now. He is at work for the day, so I'll have to wait until he comes home this evening. But I do have the other sweater that he wants it to fit the same as, so I'm just going to hold it up against that and hope that it is somewhat similar, and also be able to judge the length so that I can make sure I'm okay to add the ribbing on. It's actually looking pretty good. The taper on the sleeve matches this sweater almost perfectly, which I didn't really measure or account for that to happen, but that makes me think that the sleeve taper will be pretty good now. I'm a little bit unsure on whether to add a tiny bit more length before I put in the ribbing. I am kind of thinking maybe I just add the ribbing on now, and then after I block the sweater, if I need to take out any length, it's only a tiny bit of ribbing and I can add in a few more rows and then redo the cuff. So I'm kind of thinking maybe I do that, just because I know when I block it, the whole weight of the sweater might drag down the sleeve a little bit. I feel pretty confident now that I can go ahead and add in the second sleeve and then go back onto the body, and then somehow this sweater will be done. I feel like this has gone by so quickly. To wrap up this episode here. Thank you very much for watching and joining me for the past couple of weeks as I work on my projects. I did manage to finish that pair of socks as I mentioned, but I'm going to be annoying and say that I'm not going to show them. I think I did already say that the striping pattern didn't really work up as I expected. They weren't very evenly spaced stripes and they didn't really have like a distinct finish to each stripe. It was more of like in between a self-striping and a variegated. They look really good, it just wasn't what I was expecting. But one thing I did notice is when I was blocking them, I did have a little bit of the dye leach out into the water. The water did look a little bit purple when I took the socks out, which was a little bit of a concern, and they had like a little bit of a chemically like aniseed smell, which I had never experienced with socks before. So if you've used that yarn, I would love to know if you had a similar experience with maybe a different color. It was only a tiny little bit, so I'm hoping that I managed to get the rest of the color out with that blocking. But that was a little bit worrying considering it wasn't super inexpensive yarn, and I've never had that before, even with hand-dyed sock yarn. I wouldn't mind so much if they were socks for myself, but because they are a gift, I'm really hoping that this person won't wash them and then all the color leaches out and ruins any of their other clothes. So I'll wrap up this episode with a bit of an overview on my whips and where I'm up to on them now. So the main thing that I have been working on the past few days is this Northland sweater, and I'm actually really close to being able to finish this now. The last time I spoke about this, I was working up the first sleeve again. I had knit the sleeve and then I had decided to rip it out because it was a little bit too long and I wanted to have slightly more tapered sleeves on this as well. You would have seen that I was holding this up against the sweater that I'm trying to copy the size and the shape of, and I was thinking the sleeve might be a little bit short, but I was going to go and add the ribbing anyway. I last minute, when I sat down to actually do the ribbing, chickened out and added a few extra rounds after the final decrease. Like I said, I did add a few extra rounds on the ribbing just to make it about 1 centimeter longer, just because I think it looks a little bit better with this chunkier gauge. I followed what the pattern recommends and only went down 1 needle size to do the ribbing, so I knit the cuff on a 5mm needle versus the 5.5 for the rest. Comparing the ribbing on the collar to the cuff, I think it was probably a good idea to go down to the 4.5 for the collar, just to make sure that it sat really nicely and brought the whole neckline in a little bit more. But I think if I had done that for the cuff, they definitely would cinch in too much. And I actually find that a lot of my sleeves, that sometimes I am really trying to aggressively block cuffs to be straight along with the rest of the sleeve. Sometimes I don't mind the balloon sleeve look, but oftentimes when it's a tapered sleeve like this, I don't really like having a super tight cuff. So maybe in future projects for myself, I might consider just going down 1 needle size to knit the ribbing. I had my boyfriend try this on last night and it fits him perfectly. He's really happy with how the sleeves are fitting, so that was a good win. And I this morning managed to finish off the second sleeve. The sleeves have gone by so quickly. Like, I've basically knit 3 sleeves in like 3 or 4 days. I don't really know how that's happened, but like I said before, I just find that sleeves go by really quickly and I really enjoy knitting them. And now I'm back onto the body. I think this will probably take the most time, but whilst I'm still excited to be knitting on this, I think I'm going to try and go back, pick up the stitches for the body again and knit away. I already have probably just under 10 centimeters of the body knit, and I worked out that I probably need to knit this to about 40 centimeter body length altogether, including the ribbing. So I don't have a huge amount of stock in it to go. And with this looser gauge, I think that should go by relatively quickly. I have really been enjoying just having one main garment project on my needles at a time. That is kind of how I would typically knit a few years ago, and then maybe over the past few months and this year, I've started casting on multiple garment projects. But I just find that I always end up gravitating mostly towards one, and then in the back of my mind, I'm slightly stressing that I have too many projects on the needles, because realistically I only really work on one garment at a time. So as much as I do want to cast on a Cara wrap cardigan, I think I am possibly going to try and finish this one first, just so I can completely focus on that and not have any distractions. Saying that, I might just do the gauge swatch whilst I'm working on this, just so then when this is finished, I'm completely ready to go and cast it on. In between working on the socks and the Northland sweater, I have also been getting a bit of progress in on my Sweet Shop blanket. This has been so enjoyable to work on and it just looks so beautiful. I love all of the colors and it's just such a nice, comforting project to be knitting on. So I currently have 14 squares on the blanket and I don't really know how that's happened. They just seem to fly by so quickly. And it's, yeah, like I said, really enjoyable to be picking out each color and adding it in and seeing how the blanket is growing. This is definitely a much longer term project, and to be honest, it's making progress a lot quicker than I really anticipated. I did really want this to be a slow going long-term project that I can just pick up and do a square every now and again. But once I get started on it, it's so hard to put it down. I don't really have a specific deadline or goal in mind for when I want to finish this. It will just be finished whenever it is, but at the pace that I'm going, it will definitely be completed by winter next year. Obviously the weather here is warming up very quickly, so I definitely don't need a woolly blanket. And I'm thinking in the middle of summer, this will probably be too warm to be working on because I will basically be covered in a blanket as I'm working on it. So it makes me think maybe I will want to hibernate this throughout the summer and then be able to have something to pick back up again when autumn and winter come around. At the moment, I'm enjoying working on this far too much to consider hibernating it at the moment. I'm keeping this with all of the yarn in a big bag down here, so whenever I'm sitting here, I can just kind of pick it up and work on it and add in a square here and there. So I might just keep it down there and then work on it as and when I feel like doing it. But yeah, I'm super happy with how this is coming along. It's such a great pattern. I would highly recommend if you're looking for something to use up scraps. You don't even need to have a main color. I've seen a lot of great versions that used 2 different advent calendars held together. I think last year Leslie from Knit California used 2 separate advent calendars and had 1 advent calendar for each half of the square, and that looked really great. So there's so many different options that you can use for this pattern, especially with advent calendars coming up for the month of December. I don't have any yarny advent calendars. I just don't really know what I would do with them, and it is a lot of money to invest in yarn that I may or may not like. It's just not really within my budget this year. One year I would love to purchase one and have the excitement of opening up yarn and potentially working on an advent project, but for this year I'm just going to make do with the scraps that I already have. Speaking of advents and December, I am planning on sharing some vlogmas videos this year. Last year I did not film vlogmas videos. I had a very traditional 9-to-5 full-time job where I was in the office every day, and my life was very boring, so I didn't think it would really be worth sharing. But this year I feel like this style of more chatty vlog podcast has really built my confidence in sharing a bit more clips of my everyday life. I'm also very fortunate to be in a very different stage of my life at the moment. My job is a lot more flexible and I have a lot more time at home. So I think that it would be a lot more interesting to share a vlogmas this year. I don't think I'll be posting every day. That's a lot of content to be posting and sharing and watching, and I don't think I have enough interesting parts of my day to be posting every single day. So I'll probably group together days where I'm doing something interesting and share it all in one video. So if you do enjoy watching vlogmas, or you enjoy watching these more vlog style podcasts, I would love for you to stick around and join along for the month of December. So I think technically this will be the last kind of podcast episode that I share for this year. I will definitely be keeping you updated on all my projects and my knitting throughout vlogmas in December, so I really hope to see you there. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in December. Bye!